You don't have to wait until people know your name or wait till you think you've got it perfect. You'll never have it perfect. You just have to jump in sometimes with as much knowledge as you have and go from there. And hopefully most of the things you do will be successful versus, the lessons. But, it's okay to have a few bruises along the way.
Expanding possibilities, the Mindset Zone.
I'm your host, Anna Melikian. And before we start with today's show, please remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. Today we have a repeat guest. I interviewed Debbie about 2 months ago, where we spoke about her book, Success is Easy, that really is about her story of being an entrepreneur from young age of 19, and now she always kept a learning attitude and really build her way to success. And when I was researching for the interview, I learned that she was in the Howard Stern show and she rocked it. So I decided to invite her back here because I think it's fascinating to go a little bit into the mindset that she had to work and go through to be able to pull that one out. Because I don't know if everybody that is listening is familiar with the Howard Stern show. In the 80s was one of the biggest radio shows here in the United States. And honestly, when I was living in Europe, I had a very negative image of it. I only knew it about the TV snippets that he also did from the show and was so sensationalist and outrageous. And only when I moved to the United States back in 2003 that I got married, I moved here, and my husband was a fan of Howard Stern, and my sister-in-law too. And then they explained me the fascination that they had about him was his interviewing skills. He will take things out of people that nobody else will take, but he didn't have any issue also in put people on the spot. So it's brave, I'd say, is a lot of eyeballs there, absolutely. And at the same time is a very challenged situation. So with that setup, Debbie, this was when you were promoting another one of your books, correct?
Yes. Who would have thought, right? I wanted it back then in the heyday of radio shows. You wanted to be on radio shows. Now we're on podcasts telling the story. So it's quite interesting years later to be asked to be on the podcast to tell the story, which I've told many times, and never really felt that it was going to be much of anything when I first said yes to it. I just knew it was a challenge. I like challenges. And like you said, this is not a regular radio show. This is what you call kind of get the guest. Let's find a way to embarrass them, get some outrageous something happening, because that's the whole thing about the shock jock. That was his brand. But, here's the thing about the brand is that people remembered it because he was so shocking. He learned how to be an interviewer to get what he wanted from the show, but he was also an amazing marketer. And people didn't realize that so much, what a marketer he was. How much he really believed in what he was doing and knew that, hey, there would be listeners, there would be a career for him. And so before I tell you about that, I'll tell you about, just knowing my own following for him. I'm not the kind of person that would listen to Howard Stern, but I actually saw a movie that he had created called Private Parts. And it was a story of his life and about how he kept getting fired over and over from every radio show because he was outrageous. And they're like, you can't do this. And then they would give him all these rules and he would break every single rule and he kept getting fired. But I said, when I was on the show, I remember telling him early on, I said, I remember seeing that movie and I thought, wow, you really believe in what you're doing. You had a wife, you had a child on the way, you kept getting fired from job after job and you just kept going. And so for that, Howard, I really admire your tenacity, your outrageousness. And, thank you for having me on the show. But before this, let's go back a step. I was writing this book called Confessions of Shameless Self-Promoters. And Howard's a great shameless self-promoter for sure, right? And one of the people that was in my book, his name was Bill Goss. And I met him through the National Speakers Association. I went to a chapter and I sat with him. This guy was so funny. I'm like, he is a blast. But, his story that he wrote was the luckiest unlucky man alive. That was his whole keynote story. So, okay, I like Bill. He's funny, but I don't want to hang out with him because, he's got danger, right? But then when that opportunity came up, another way that came up actually is another member of National Speakers Association, Riley Pinsky, who wrote a book called 101 Ways to Promote Yourself. So I saw that she had promoted it in a publication that would come out called Radio TV Interview Report. And so I contacted Raleigh. I mean, that's what's great about having friends in the business is like, how is that worked for you? And she said, take out a half a page ad, let them write the copy. I know you're a marketer, but let them write the copy because they know what radio shows are looking for. And so I said, okay, so took her advice, took out, 3 months and a half page ad, and they wrote the title, This Guest Can Make Anybody Shamelessly Successful.
Love it.
But I didn't like it because it wasn't like I'm going to make you, that kind of thing. It would be like, oh, that's really what it should have said. But here's what it really said. This guest can make anybody shamelessly famous. Okay. Famous versus successful, famous. Okay. I didn't like that word, but I kept it in there. Right. So that's all. Let's see how this goes. And I'm on every radio show I could be on. It was early days and I'm learning this. I'm on like, 2 people showing up on a radio show versus, syndicated shows. So when I got the call from
so let's just go slow because there are so wonderful good stuff here. The network, the tapping into the grid to make things work. So first of all, you did the book. You had that book that was Confessions of the Shameless Self-Promoter. You had done the book, write the book, and now you were in promoting the book. You really knew that you had to walk your talk and you had to be out there. And one of the places to be were radio shows and even show up in publications that they will read for them to contact you because Howard Stern producer, he contact you, probably saw this ad.
Exactly. You don't write a book without promoting it, right? And so back then, again, it was the radio shows. Now it's podcasts. And then again, you call out to people that have supported you. So I believe also in having mentors. Here's another lesson is that you have to hire somebody as a coach or a mentor to help you through challenging things or things that you need to learn. And so I called up Bill Goss, that I had met, and I said, hey, I remember you telling me when we were interviewing your story in my book, Confessions of Shameless Self-Promoters, you said to me that you were on Howard Stern talking about one of your accidents. And you were on that show for over an hour and it went in all kinds of directions. Whoa. And so I said, can I call you and have you kind of coach me for this show? Because this isn't a typical radio show by any means.
But this was after you got the call inviting you to the show, correct?
Exactly. So like, who do you know? Like, I said yes, but then I'm scared. Actually the call was, I didn't even think it was real because it was, he says, this is Casey Armstrong from the Howard Stern Show. And we heard about your book, want to have you on the show. It's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, right. Which friend is a practical joke. I didn't believe him at first, and he's like, no. And it's funny. I kept sending books, not just one book, like a lot. I would send a box of books and then they would disappear. And then I'd call him like, you got the books, first, because I first sent the first book, it was gone. Then I sent a box of books. Then I think I sent another box of books, they were gone. I'm like, okay, at least people are stealing them that, in the studio or whatever, they're disappearing. I don't even know if Howard really even read it, but hey, it got me on the show, right? It got me there.
So that I like to break things in little pieces because I think we can absorb better. You had the book, you promote the book, put it all over there. You got this call, you got in their radar. They contact you. You said yes. And then there was the big but. Oh my gosh, what did I get into? And then it's when you tap into your network. Okay, if I'm going to go there, I will be as best prepared and I will take the most out of the situation. That was your mindset.
Exactly. And, so Bill, this is what he told me. He said, you don't want more than 5 minutes or it's going to go in the wrong direction.
Ooh. That was better, because that could be deceiving, because it's a big opportunity, a big audience, and you can think, oh, as much time, the better. But you learn, you are strategical. No, maybe short, to the point, coming out alive, and and in a good light. That will be the best strategy.
Yeah, well, my main goal was keeping my clothes on and professionalism intact. That was my number one goal. My goal at the time was not to get a bestseller book out of this. He's not like Oprah's Book of the Month Club. It's like, this is Howard, right? And so, with that in mind, I called Bill every week, every Monday at the same time for a whole month, because I wasn't going to be on the show like in a month or two. So we had the time to work on it. And I had my little index cards, like, okay, if he says this, say this kind of thing, and you got to be sassy and you got to be on edge. You can't be too nice. It's like typical, like being somebody completely different to fit into this narrative, basically. And so you have to, again, the lesson there is be able to mold and tailor your message according to who you're speaking to, whether it's podcast, radio show, an audience, whatever it is, right? So it basically is being really prepared in that way. And so when I got on that show, I knew that I had to really take control of this. Otherwise, it was going to be a bad situation. And I wouldn't tell anybody I was ever on that show. So when I got on the show at first, he goes, hey, it says here, this guest can make anybody shamelessly famous. And I'm like, yeah, I knew he was going to go to that, right? And it wasn't the thing I wrote. And so then he goes, well, I've never heard of you before. I said, Howard, I'm on your show, aren't I? Check mark number one.
Yes.
Yeah, dang, right? And he's like, trying to slap me around a little bit, like I'm here. And then he's like, well, I know, shameless self-promotion is good. People need to be promoting that. But tell me why you're the person to write this. And then, I told him some tips, but I made it funny. I said, I gave him some funny stories from the book and how people can utilize it, because I believe everybody should toot their own horn, because I was like, who's going to do it if you don't do it, right? And he agreed with that. And I remember that, they had 3 people on the show. They have a producer, they have Robin, who's still with them like all these years later, right? And Howard. And so they had been beating Robin up for like an hour before I got on the show, because I'm listening. I had to get up at 4:00 in the morning to do this, to get the show time. And I'm listening to this show, and they're just like beating her up about all kinds of stuff, like, oh, you don't know how to ride horses, and you do this, and it's like, so by the time she got me on there, she's thinking, hey, I'm going to nail this chick, right? And so she was like kind of attacking me. And then I found, I realized that I started standing up for myself, that Howard started standing up for me. And he'd go like, well, let's just hear her out. Let's just, and then he'd ask another question. He'd kind of cut Robin off. And the other producer started, messing around a little bit and with me. And then it was like, they realized they couldn't mess with me. This was not something they were used to doing. So they kind of got quiet. And then, Howard got into, asking me the questions and stuff. And I said, well, Howard, you are a shameless self-promoter. And he goes, well, I'm not really. I don't have like the mugs and the t-shirts like all these other guys that go out there and they're just outrageous. I don't do that way. I said, no, you do it in a completely different way. You do it in a way that is outrageous, and that's your brand. And that's, puts you out there for people to pay attention, because it's so like, wow, nobody's doing this. It's shocking. I said, and I said, I respect that you're a good marketer. And then I told him I saw the movie and respected him that way. I said, but here, Howard, I do not respect the way you treat women on your show.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you're very disrespectful for women. And, and he just kind of got quiet. It was like kind of crickets. And I thought, well, he's going to hang up. I don't know. And then he was like, yeah, okay. He just like, kind of like, okay, let's brush that off. And then I said, yeah, you promote a lot of other things that probably shouldn't be promoted on there. And actually, like that morning, he was promoting like drunken midgets. Like, you don't even use those words. Like very, unthoughtful, very, rude. And I brought it up, like, because then it was like, hey, I'm a listener. I'm like paying attention here.
Yeah.
And so he just totally switched the interview and he said, well, I don't promote books on this show. Like everybody knows, like I don't promote books like Oprah does. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I was thinking. And I'm like, yeah, I don't expect them to promote the book, but I got a little story about being sassy, And then he goes, but you know what? I really do believe that everybody's got to promote themselves because, I mean, if you don't do that, you're not going to get recognized. I don't care what you're doing. He, went off on saying all that stuff about shameless self-promotion and how it's done. And what Debbie's here, she wrote the book and teaching you how to do it effectively so people do pay attention to you. And he goes, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to promote this book. And he says, the name of the book, Confessions of Shameless Self-Promoters, go get it, go learn from this gal. She knows something about what this is all about, and everybody needs to do it. And so, within 1 hour, it went to bestseller. And on Amazon. Then I had another spike later in the day, like because when his show went from East Coast to West Coast, when it was then his next spike went up. So it was like people were like going on and buying it like instantly. So, the real lesson of this over everything was the power of the media, and the power of also just saying yes to what makes you fearful, like
and the power of preparing.
A lot of lessons in there, actually. Yes. For 4. And it was like, I was watching the clock. It was like 4 minutes. I'm like, oh gosh, gotta wrap this up soon. And I know what I said to like kind of wrap this thing up. I think that's when he started promoting the book. And I said, hey, it's been, thanks for doing that or whatever. And it wrapped up at about 4.5 minutes.
Wow.
But I was funny. I was sassy. I called him out. And that's how I got respect, which seems very disrespectful. But in that case, it really worked because, anytime you show up for something, you have to like mold into the culture. And, I've learned that even, traveling and speaking 28 countries, like you don't try and push your agenda on somebody else in another country. It's the same thing like this. Like if you're, you got to fit the agenda to really mold in with the group.
And I love that yes, is doing the work, is fitting the agenda, knowing the culture, and still preserving you. You are still you.
Right. Because I thought, what do I have to, and I think this is the biggest lesson I could tell anybody that's listening here is that, what do you have to lose? Right. And the one thing I didn't want to lose is my personal respect and be treated poorly or anything like that. So I knew I needed to stand up for myself. And I thought, what do I have to lose? Hey, I was on there. It's a few minutes out of my life. I didn't sell any books from it. That's the worst case scenario. And I never even considered best case scenario being like the easiest bestseller I've ever made in my life. And that book, here's the interesting thing about that book is when I was writing that book, it was actually my third book? It was actually my second book, actually. Yes, because actually I wrote it as a self-published book and then a major publisher picked it up, after. So I went self-published, bestseller, all of this. I was just a marketer, right? I was like, what do I need to do to market this? So second book was kind of similar to the first book. I interviewed people because I didn't think I was a good writer because in school I was really bad in English and my English teacher told me, you're not even going to graduate from high school if you don't pass this next test. So in my mind, I didn't feel I was a good writer. So I only wrote the opening for the book and the starts for all of the chapters. When I did the revision of the book, I wrote more of my own voice in it. But it was quite interesting that it was everybody else's voice. And I can even share those, sharing those stories of some of the people that shared, their stories in the book because it was now, collaboration. And then another thing that happened with that's huge collaboration. The people that were in the book was, Dan Kennedy, I followed in marketing, Mark Victor Hansen, Joe Vitale, all the top marketers that I had been following. And now they know me. And, in fact, Dan Kennedy loved the book so much. He had bought hundreds of copies of the book and gave it to all of his gold members. And he even asked me to come speak at his event. So, getting on the Dan Kennedy stage back then was a big deal too. But that all came from the book. And I think the guts of just somebody talking about what he believed in. I mean, everybody, all the great marketers, they believed in it. So they all kind of told their little edgy stories of, how they got ahead, It was really interesting.
And now, how many books do you have published?
I'm working on my 10th now.
Wow, I love that. It's so, how do you say, how can you keep, that is one of the things that I more admire about you, is that you relentless, keep learning, and you keep evolving, and you keep promoting and helping other people out there to really making a difference out there.
Yeah, I guess relentless is a good word for it, right? But that's that's the true entrepreneur in me, make it happen, no matter what happens. And I think that I grew up in a really scrappy environment in my 20s in business and worked in in a car rental business where our number one clientele was like drug lords, like, and we're like turning, I'm 20 years, it's in my 20s, I'm turning people down that are like, involved in drugs and bad stuff. And they would rent cars and do drive-by shootings. I mean, it was like a tough thing. And it was right outside of Gary, Indiana, where we built this. And so I think it taught me then, like, do whatever it takes, like go repossess that car, and I'm lucky that, nothing happened to me, but we were in pretty dangerous situations. But I mean, what a great way to grow up. Just like, hey, I've been scrappy since I've been a young age, so I'm not going to say no to very many things. And I think, we have to either learn it in our life or we, put a shell around us and say, I'm so afraid if something's going to happen. I think the best things that come out of my life are things where I was gutsy or pushed the limits or, something like this. I mean, that created a whole career. I mean, I was so busy with that shameless self-promotion. I was speaking at retail, real estate, mortgage, politics. I was a keynote speaker at the Arizona Governor's Conference. I mean,
wow.
Talking about shameless self-promotion, right? I had no idea how it would be so big. And I really just wanted to create a book that was different than my retail, because I wanted to move away from just my retail background.
And at the same time, because yes, you always that learning attitude and always greed, trying to make things happen and go for it. And sometimes I see that people get a level of success like you got, and they start to be afraid of trying something new. They start to be afraid of failing. But you keep going. Do you think that is that open attitude, always learning?
I mean, I think I did so many failures early on that it was like, that's where my lessons came from, because we were thrown into this business. It was a family business. My father was an entrepreneur, and he created this business on top of, doing the car rental, which went from 5 cars to 250 cars, to then building the first mini storage business outside of the Chicago area there. I mean, we were like trendsetters without even knowing it. And then having to figure out how to do it. We didn't take classes. We didn't have mentors. We just did it. And my dad really didn't want to work the business. He liked to have the ideas. So it was up to me and my brother to like work the business and figure it out. And, we grew up together figuring out the business, and we're both, been entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs ever since. But we also learned what didn't work. I think my dad, he had great ideas, and I learned a lot of good things, but he was also made a lot of big mistakes. And I would see him making them and go, don't do that, right? Focus on your business and make it successful before you start 3 other businesses. Otherwise, you're going to go through all your money. Like it was almost like a gambling thing for him. And focus on it and don't go out and play and expect everybody else to run it. And so, just a ton of lessons that I learned by watching mistakes. I mean, I took that same path and continue to fail all the time, or I could have taken a different path and said, I don't want to do that. Like, okay. But, now we read books, and now we have mentors and coaches for that. But back then that just wasn't the case. It was grassroots, in the trenches, figure it out.
And you keep inspiring. So where people can learn more about you?
They can go to debbieallen.com, DEBBIEALLEN.com, and I can make anybody shamelessly famous, not really, but successful. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's so you can learn more about what I do now is expert positioning, because I believe that everything is positioning. When I positioned myself to be on the Howard Stern show, it was how I was going to position myself, how I was going to deliver. Everything is about positioning, from your marketing to how you show up. And that's how people, respect you in the world. How I positioned that book to connect with all those high level speakers and experts who I could call out as a favor anytime because of the relationship I built. But they didn't know my name. They didn't know who I was. And so you don't have to wait until people know your name, or, wait till you think you've got it perfect. You'll never have it perfect. You just have to jump in sometimes with as much knowledge as you have, and go from there. And hopefully most of the things you do will be successful versus, the lessons. But, it's okay to have a few bruises along the way.
I love it. Love it. Love it. So let's keep learning. Let's keep exploring and expanding what's possible out there and making a difference. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's fun sharing the story again. Thank you, Anna.
Expanding possibilities. The Mindset Zone.
Thank you for listening, and remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. As always, I'm so grateful you are here. Expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world.